Hi, everyone. I hope that you're not too sleepy after lunch because I want you to take a journey with me as we explore the history of the music industry. Back before 1877, the only way that people could listen to music was to hear it live. That was before Thomas Edison invented the phonograph, which could record music and play it back, or record sound and play it back. This was a remarkable, revolutionary invention. Simple, yet ingenious. The way it worked is it captured the vibration of sound, which moved a little needle inside of the machine, which then inscribed onto tin foil. And then the machine could read back that tin foil and replay the sound. So Thomas Edison, much like us testers, he began to think of all of the possible scenarios that this could be used for. Perhaps to capture someone's last dying words, or maybe as voice dictation in the office. But Edison predicted that its most popular use case would be to play back musical performances. And he was right. Musicians love the idea of being able to have their songs immortalized, and listeners love the idea of being able to listen to their favorite artists whenever they wanted to. Now, having these recordings was wonderful. However, there was a limitation there. There was only one copy of this thing. So they looked at how they might be able to improve on the phonograph, and they decided to come up with what's called the gramophone. And what the gramophone did is instead of writing to the tin foil, it wrote to a wax disc. This disc is what the records look like. And this is where the term cutting a record came from, because the needle was actually cutting the record, the sound into the record. So this gave them a new business model where multiple people could buy a copy of the same recording. Now with this new era, there were some changes, some adjustments that musicians needed to make. They were used to performing live on stage and interacting with an audience. Now they needed to go inside of this room to actually record in front of the machine. And so in doing that, there were a couple of things that they needed to tweak. For example, when they composed songs to perform on stage, this was such a rarity that you wanted to give people their money's worth. So the song would last a very long time. It would be very elaborate. It could last up to an hour. Well, the disc couldn't hold that much data, so they had to condense this. Now the song needed to be 2 to 3 minutes. But you needed to be able to tell that same story, give that same magic, because now people were buying it and they wanted to listen to it over and over again. Some of the instruments that they used are the guys who played the guitar in the lobby. Are you here? Yes? Okay, don't be shy now. So they were playing all night the other night. Imagine this. So this instrument that you're skilled at, the machine can't pick it up that well. It sounds horrible when you play it back. So they had to get rid of some of their instruments and replace them with something else. For example, the bass drum needed to be replaced with cowbell. And if they needed to sing or play a really low passage, they would have to put their face right inside of the horn in order for it to be picked up by the machine. And if they wanted to sing something really high, they would have to back away or risk the needle jumping out of the groove. Also, there was not a lot of room for error, because as they were performing, this was writing it to the disc. So we couldn't waste disc. So stage presence and charisma, things like this that were important back during live performances weren't so important here. What was more important is efficiency and being able to do a clean take. That energy that they got from the crowd was missing here. They had to perform in these small, cold rooms, but yet it had to be magical because people were now playing it over and over again, and they could pick out any nuance. So it was a much different time for the musicians. Now that people were able to buy their own copies of music, they began to develop preferences. So someone in the family might enjoy opera as their genre of choice, and someone else in the household might enjoy jazz. So this was fine for the music industry because now they were able to sell lots of records to the same household. That was great for business. However, they kind of changed the dynamic of listening to music. Before, it was a much social activity where you went out, you didn't really care who was playing, you wanted to go out with your family and your friends and just have a night on the town and listen to music. But now people began to retreat to their rooms and listen to music by themselves. It became a much more personal and independent phenomenon. Now, with having your own preferences, this also did something for the nightclub business. Having live bands to come in was no longer the cool thing to do. Now everybody had their own genre and wanted to hear their own thing. So what they found a way to do is to further advance the phonograph and make it coin operated, where you can put in a nickel and you could play whatever song you want. Not only did you play the song you wanted, but you forced everyone else to hear the song that you liked as well. So that added that social element back. This was a huge hit. People loved this. This is known as what? The jukebox today. People loved this. But you know who didn't love it so much? The musicians. Because what these clubs had essentially done is automated entertainment. Automation was a big thing back then. People were crazy, you might say obsessed. They started looking at what else could we automate, and automated things like this, the player piano, where you didn't even need a human to play it. Now, at this time, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to pay for it. Either you went out to the nightclub and you paid to see the show, or you bought a record, or you dropped some coins into the jukebox. But in 1920, there was a new medium, commercial radio. And commercial radio would play the latest hit songs, and listeners didn't have to pay a dime. They could stay home and listen for free, courtesy of advertisers. This became so popular that within 2 years, there were 500 of these radio stations across the United States alone. This had a very negative effect on record sales. They plummeted during this time. And musicians were already having a difficult time from those darned jukebox machines that were playing their music and they weren't earning any royalties from it. But commercial radio also wasn't legally obligated to pay the musicians a cent. So the musicians, they were having a really difficult time. And they tried to fight against this, and they fought it would take decades before they actually earned anything. However, in the meantime, they decided to use a different approach. The record labels said, we'll kill them with quality. And they used a new technique to now record music electronically. So this sounded so much better than what was playing on the radio. It sounded better than the records they had before. So record sales increased again. Even with this technique, they were now able to bring back the old instruments that they had to get rid of before. But then in the 1930s, there was the Great Depression. And during this time, the stock market had crashed. There were several people who were without work. So things like buying records was a luxury that many people simply could not afford. So again, the musicians were struggling. The nightclubs began to suffer as well because people weren't going out as much anymore. And they were having a difficult time before even paying the musicians to come in and do live performances, so they were using the jukeboxes instead. But now that they were in the Great Depression, they really couldn't afford it. So musicians started getting less and less gigs. And nightclubs started investing more and more in the automated machines. The record labels, they also couldn't afford to do much promotion. And everybody was kind of feeling down and sad and hopeless. But they decided, I know what we could do. How about we utilize those jukeboxes as promotional tools? Let's send maybe the best song from the record to be played on the jukebox. Have everyone fall in love with it, and then they'll come back and want to buy the record. So this worked amazingly. That, coupled with the new advancement in recording techniques and the end of the Great Depression, music sales were back on the rise. And then the cassette tape came out. So with the cassette tape, before this time, if you wanted to listen to music on demand, then you would buy the record. But this introduced a new do-it-yourself era that was pretty affordable for most people. Given cassette tapes along with the commercial radio that was playing all the latest hits, well, you just stay home, you listen to music at night, and you record everything that you like. Now you have free recordings at home. You don't need the fancy record recorders that they used before. And so record sales plummeted during this time as well. In fact, this almost completely destroyed the record business. And then Sony came out with the Walkman. The Walkman now made it possible for the cassette tape to be the only medium that you could listen to at home, in the car, or even walking down the street. People loved this. And then the CD came on the scene. Now, the CD was amazing. People were in love with this format. They used another advanced technology for recording here. Now it was digital. Along with that, people began to buy music that they already owned. I own the record of this, or I own the cassette of this, but no, I want it on CD. So sales were climbing for the CD. It surpassed cassettes. It surpassed records. And then the internet came along. During the CD age, people didn't think it could get much better than that. But now we had MP3s, where I no longer even needed the physical format of the music. I could listen online. I no longer had to buy the complete record. I could buy just the songs I like. And so with this, a very interesting thing happened. They needed to change how they were measuring the musician's success. So before, if you sold, let's say, 500,000 records, then they would measure you on that. But someone could now sell 500,000 of the record, but 6 million of a particular song. Is that not success? So they had to reevaluate how they did these counts. Back with the internet and even in today's time, you have musicians that decided to utilize the internet to take greater control. Before this time, they had gotten the short end of the stick. They weren't getting their respect, they weren't getting their pay. They were constantly fighting and feeling like they were losing out on jobs. But the internet provided them this opportunity to kind of shift left, closer to their customers, to their fan base. Artists such as Prince launched websites where he could sell directly to his customers. Musicians such as Beyoncé, she released her self-titled album without any promotion. As a surprise, she went on social media and just dropped the link. Fastest selling album of all time. Artists such as Jay-Z decided to buy streaming company and control that narrative and ensure that musicians were getting a greater portion of the profit. As the music industry changed, as it faced many ups and downs, many fails, many successes, there was one thing that remained constant through it all: the role of the musician. You see, the musician's role is simply to provide entertainment to their listeners via music. That's it. That was their role back before the phonograph was ever invented. Back when the phonograph was there and now they needed to shift and start recording in the small, cold rooms, their environment changed, but their role remained the same. When they could no longer use their instruments and had to trade out those bass drums for cowbells, their tools changed, but their role remained the same. Back when they were shortening their songs and they had to go from an hour's worth of time to being able to produce that same magic in only 2 to 3 minutes, their role remained the same. And when they were fighting for their just pay and their due respect, their role remained the same. And what's very interesting is as we look back over history, all the times that they were resistant to these changes, they failed. But when they not only embraced the changes, but found ways to make the changes work in their favor, they soared. So what is our role as testers? Dale Emery and Elizabeth Hendrickson say it's a process of gathering information by making observations and comparing them to expectations. So as we shift left, the way that we gather information might change. The places where we make our observations could change. And the sources of our expectations can very well change. But our role remains the same. Not only that, our role as testers requires us to challenge what's being brought before us and determine if it meets the expectations of software delivery. Now, as we challenge these things, let's not make the same mistakes the musicians did. We don't want to be resistant. Change is inevitable. But we do want to have control of the narrative. So let's look at some of the lessons that we've learned about the history of the music industry and how we can apply them to testing and shifting left. Lesson 1. Make automation work for you. The musicians, they hated those jukeboxes. It put them out of work, automated them out of jobs. They were no longer needed. That's what they thought. They sat and they moped and they complained until they realized that, hey, we can use this as a promotional tool where we give people a sample of what there is, but they have to come back to us for the entire story. I hear a lot of testers moping, complaining, trying to degrade what automation is in our industry. We get into Twitter wars and become vocabulary Nazis because we don't want to give power to automation. We're falling into the same trap. Automation is here to stay. I don't believe it's going anywhere. We have to embrace it and own the narrative. Sure, your manager may be an idiot and think that automation is going to replace you. Own the narrative. I'm an automation engineer. I cannot replace any of you. I say that as much as possible because I want people to hear it. But you can say it as well, even if you're not an automation engineer. Control the narrative. I once worked on a machine learning application. This was a newer trend. And they wanted me to automate it. They didn't have any testers involved in this. And as I began to automate that, it became very clear to me that automation was indeed important because I had to execute thousands of records to actually make the machine learn, and then I had to execute thousands of records to test if it did learn what it was supposed to. But automation wasn't enough. I had to do some deep critical thinking and testing in that position as well. And so what I learned was automation became a tool in that case. It wasn't going to get me from A to Z. All right? Lesson 2, our tools can't always shift with us. So the musicians, they've probably been playing some of those instruments since they were little kids. Took training for it. Became masters. So I bet it was quite difficult when they were told, doesn't sound good using the gramophone. We need you to get rid of it and reskill and learn how to use a new tool. I bet that was difficult. In our case, a lot of us have been using the same tools, same techniques, same thought processes for 20 years. It's worked for me all this time. It'll work in an agile environment, right? And we're seeing people fail while they try to hang on to these things. There was a company who decided they wanted to move from waterfall methodology to practicing a more agile approach. And so they sent the entire company out to a retreat, brought in a coach, and trained them on what does it mean to be agile. So this course was several days long, and they had everyone, developers, testers, the product owners, the BAs, the managers, everybody was there, whole gang. And they learned a lot. They came back and said, yes, we want to put this in practice. And they made some great progress. However, they felt like they kept getting stuck right around testing. So they called me up and said, Angie, can you come and look at our process and see if there's anything that is jumping out to you about why is testing the bottleneck? So I observed for a while, and there were definitely some things that the entire team could do to improve the process, but there was also some things that was right in the control of the testers, such as the tools they were using. Very dated, very waterfallish. Some of the test management tools, some of the ways they were writing test cases, spreadsheets for everything. Guess what? People don't want to collaborate with you when you have 12 spreadsheets they have to go through. So I gave them some recommendations on changing their tooling, and they saw some improvements immediately. Lesson 3. Shifting imposes limitations. With the musicians, we saw when they went from the live performances to the recorded ones, there were some limitations that were imposed upon them. One being the length of the song. So this was something that had to be greatly condensed. The other was the unfamiliar environment that they needed to record in. Not having their audience there to feed off of. For us, we definitely see some of these same things. Our time for testing has gotten a lot shorter. We no longer have a month to do testing. We have a couple of days at best, and if we're moving towards things like continuous delivery, that could be hours. And yet we're expected to do just as great of a job as if we did have a month, right? The meetings that we're now involved in, this is our unfamiliar environments. We're now in dev meetings, and they can get really technical, and sometimes it's a bit over our head. We are in business meetings where they're talking strategy and big picture views, and sometimes it's difficult as a tester to see where you can contribute in these discussions. As an automation engineer, sometimes I have projects where I'm asked to do in-sprint automation. It's hard enough to test in a sprint, but now we want automation as well. So I utilize those unfamiliar environments, to one, make everyone aware of the limitations I have, but also two, to get resolution for it. Because remember, moping and complaining about it is not going to get me far. I learned that from the musicians. So instead, I may go into a dev meeting. I let them talk about all their tech stuff, and I listen and get what I can from it. But I'm going to carve a part of that meeting out for me as well and say, hey, you shouldn't be the only one who can leave this room and go and code. I want to leave and code as well. I don't want to wait for you to finish and deliver something to me. So to do that, let's get on the whiteboard and begin to sketch out the design of this. If I have a clear picture of what that looks like, I then can go and begin to automate. But something else wonderful happens in that exercise. They begin to see where they may have missed some things or made some bad assumptions in their designs. And so I've contributed to that meeting as well as gotten something from it. In the business meetings, I'm talking to the business analysts and the product owners, and I'm asking the questions such as, what is important to us? I know we think everything is important, but guess what? I have a limitation here. I'm not going to be able to automate everything. So as a team, let's decide, where do we want to spend our energy? Does two things. One, I get analytics and deeper research about what should we automate as opposed to just guessing. And two, I get buy-in. I don't get me moaning and complaining saying, you know, I shouldn't be the only one who cares about quality or the only one who's working on automation. Now, I've helped everyone else realize that this is a bigger problem than I can solve alone. And so they're the ones who comes up with the idea of, oh, okay, all of this is important to us. Angie can't do it alone. Let's get some help. Dev, can you pitch in? All right. In the last lesson, adjust the measurement of success. So the musicians, when they went to the MP3s and people started buying these individual songs, they saw that there was a need to measure things a bit differently. Our industry is a bit slower at realizing this. Because as we're shifting left, these metrics are staying over there on the right. If our role, our purpose for shifting left is to identify issues, assumptions, bad design before it's ever developed, why are we still being measured on the number of bugs that we find? It's contradictory. There was a tester I knew, best tester I've ever known. And you all are great testers, so that tells you a lot. This guy, he did a remarkable job of shifting left. He could walk into those unfamiliar meetings, and he would say, let me hear the design. They would run it by him, and he would say, nope, that's not going to work. You're going to break this part of the application if you do that. Oh, you want to plug into that third-party API? Not with that design. It's not going to work. You're going to break this, this, and that. Here are some things you have not thought of. Remarkable tester. It got to the point where they had to remember to invite him to the meeting, to now they didn't want to have the meeting if this guy couldn't come. He provided that much value. But guess what? He was finding issues before they actually surfaced. So he didn't have a lot of bugs that he'd opened. Yet, his manager was still measuring him on that metric. So when he was being compared to his peers, they were getting higher ratings than he was, because they were finding more bugs. This guy eventually lost his job. Best tester I've ever known. So as our industry changes, as we look at how our value and our position is being questioned, it could be difficult. You say own the narrative, Angie, but it's tough, especially when the powers that be are demanding things from us. They don't even understand testing, and let alone want to tell us how to shift left. When we have thought leaders in our industry who make bold statements such as testing is dead. When we see job wreck after job wreck requiring skills that we don't necessarily have. It's difficult. I get it. But studying the history of other industries and how they've dealt with great change and the threat of becoming obsolete, and seeing how they yet triumph, this helps me to stay encouraged and gives me perspective on how we might be able to move forward as an industry ourselves. So, as you navigate these changes and try to determine how to stay true to your role in light of these changes, I encourage you to find these opportunities to own your narrative. Thank you. All right. I tried to do this whole mic drop moment, but Jose wants me to answer questions, so.
Yes.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry for that. So, any questions? So, you got it.
Hello. What did inspire you to pick musicians as a comparison?
Good question. So I've looked at lots of different industries that have dealt with the threat of becoming obsolete. One was music. Others were print, radio, different avenues. To be honest, music felt more fun, so I went with that one.
Okay. Thank you. More questions? More questions? There.
Hi, Angie. So I love the problem you were talking about, like metrics, essentially measuring the wrong stuff or essentially helping a kind of behavior that we don't want. So what I wonder is for a typical QA tester who actually wants to move to the left side and still has got metrics in their company that are not facilitating that. All you gave us today is a story of somebody who actually lost his job. I just wonder, what options would you go for if it happened to you? If you have an idea, of course.
It's very difficult. Someone from the States texted me today, and it was the middle of the night here. But I got up and called back, and this guy told me he just got fired, and we talked about why, and the foundational reason was because he didn't have enough bugs. And he knew. So management would talk to him about this over and over again. You need more bugs. This is the number of bugs you're supposed to have. You don't have it. And he's a fairly good tester, and he had to stand on what he believed and say, you know what, I don't care about bugs. I want to find issues, and it might not necessarily realize into bugs. And so he was willing to take that chance and lose his job over it because that wasn't the right job for him. There are other people in that job that will say, well, I guess I better open some bugs then so that I can keep my job. I think that's a very personal decision. Do you care to enlighten the powers that be? And yeah, maybe they won't listen to you. Maybe you'll lose your job. Or do you say, they're so stupid, but here's 5 more bugs. Give me my check. It's a personal thing, I think.
Okay. More questions?
Hey. So just to extend on that question, so number of bugs logged is bad. What's good? What's a good metric then? What's an example of some good ones?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'm not the metric expert. I hate metrics in general. But I would think if we are producing quality software at the end, then we all should celebrate, is what I think. Forget the lines of code that we wrote, forget the number of bugs that we opened or fixed. Did we do a good job? Did we produce what we said we were going to produce? Are our customers happy with it? It's my opinion.
Okay. More questions. So over there. Okay. So.
So, what quality is for you? Because we sell information or we sell a product with quality?
I didn't understand the question.
Because you sell that's you important to sell the quality, that you provide quality. But we provide information, and with information you can use the products with the products or not. And what
Right.
you are in your opinion about that?
Right. So yeah, I think as testers, a big part of our role is to provide the information, right? Sometimes we get into battles and trying to convince everyone that, hey, this is important and this should be fixed. And a lot of testers don't believe that we should go that far. Here's the information to the team. You make what decision you want. I'm somewhere in the middle with that. I believe I should give you the information, but I'm also a part of the team. I'm also a stakeholder, and I also would like to advocate for the customers. So if it's an issue that I feel would be detrimental for our customer success, then I might fight a little harder to say, hey, we need to put some focus and attention on this issue. But I come at that very carefully. I take off my tester and technical hat, and I put on my customer hat and say, this is what this would mean for the customer. And so I'm still kind of just giving them the information, but I'm painting it in a different light so that they understand not just what the bug is, but the impact that that bug has.
More questions. Oh, okay. Now. People are getting excited.
Hi, Angie.
Hi.
Great talk.
Thank you.
Continuing the questions that have been made, I've actually given a lot of thought of this because measuring bugs is like a really bad metric, as you have said. And I consider myself that what we should be measuring is risk for the customer. And I mean, it's a complex topic. I don't know how to measure risk. I just wanted to know if you have ever thought about it and if you know of any way of doing it.
So I have this model. I don't use it for bugs, but I use it for determining what I want to automate. And one of the criteria I look at is risk. But like you said, that's a generic term. Like, how do we actually put something on that? And so what I do is I divide that into this grid where risk means, I don't know, go to my site and get what risk means. But I have basically 2 factors, and it's questions. And basically, you can rate this versus this and put it together and kind of get this score of what's the risk number for that. If you inbox me, you can inbox me on Twitter or email me or go to my site, angiejones.tech. I can send you that information.
I would like to posit that today, many times the testers are not the musicians, they are the sound technicians who are paid less and are not really part of the team. How do we help testers become part of the musical band or the musical ensemble and not outside of the team?
I like that analogy.
It's good.
How do we do this? Everybody's like, yeah. I don't know, that's difficult. I don't have like a concrete answer right now, but I think it's a culture, the culture. And sometimes we try to solve problems from a technical point of view when it's not a technical problem at all. It's very much so about the relationships and the dynamics between players on the team and realizing that everyone has their purpose and we're all trying to reach this same end goal. And so we should work together and treat each other with respect and appreciate each other's crafts. So that also goes to the point of owning our narrative, but there's only so much we can do at that point, right? I can't make you respect me. So it's a greater issue, I think.
Thanks. Last question.
It's not really a question, but it's a add to the risk thingy. I think the 2, how do you call it?
Axes.
Yeah, axes were the chance that it will occur and the impact that it will have.
Were you at my talk?
No, I got it from somebody else, but
Oh. Who? Dorothy?
no, Rob.
Okay.
Okay.
Give us a link. If you send it to me, I'll send it to him along with my link.
Okay.
All right.
So, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Was it great? It was great.